Failing an opportunity, in the second case, for direct attack, one must attempt to increase whatever weakness there may be in the opponent's position, or, if there is none, one or more must be created. It is always an advantage to threaten something, but such threats must be carried into effect only if something is to be gained immediately. For, holding the threat in hand, forces the opponent to provide against its execution and to keep material in readiness to meet it. Thus he may more easily overlook, or be able to parry, a thrust at another point. But once the threat is carried into effect, it exists no longer, and your opponent can devote his attention to his own schemes. One of the best and most successful maneuvers in this type of game is to make a demonstration on one side, so as to draw the forces of your opponent to that side, then through the greater mobility of your pieces to shift your forces quickly to the other side and break through, before your opponent has had the time to bring over the necessary forces for the defense. e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, d takes e4, knight takes e4, knight d7, knight f3, knight g f6, knight takes f6, check, knight takes f6, knight e5. This move was first shown to me by the talented Venezuelan amateur, Ayala. The object is to prevent the development of black's queen's bishop via b7, after b7, b6, which is black's usual development in this variation. Generally it is bad to move the same piece twice in an opening before the other pieces are out, and the violation of that principle is the only objection that can be made to this move, which otherwise has everything to recommend it. Bishop d6. Queen f3. Bishop g5 might be better. The text move gives black an opportunity of which he does not avail himself. c6. c5 was the right move. It would have led to complications, in which black might have held his own, at least, white's play would be very difficult. The text move accomplishes nothing, and puts black in an altogether defensive position. The veiled threat bishop takes e5 followed by queen a5, check is easily met. c3. Castle kingside. Bishop g5. Bishop e7. The fact that black has now to move his bishop back clearly demonstrates that black's plan of development is faulty. He has lost too much time, and white brings his pieces into their most attacking position without hindrance of any sort. Bishop d3. Knight e8. The alternative was knight d5. Otherwise white would play queen h3, and black would be forced to play g6, seriously weakening his kingside. Queen h3. f5. White has no longer an attack, but he has compelled black to create a marked weakness. Now white's whole plan will be to exploit this weakness, the weak e-pawn, and the student can now see how the principles expounded previously are applied in this game. Every move is directed to make the weak e-pawn untenable, or to profit by the inactivity of the black pieces in defending the pawn, in order to improve the position of white at other points. Bishop takes e7. Queen takes e7. Castle kingside. Rook f6. Rook f e1. Knight d6. Rook e2. Bishop d7. At last the bishop comes out, not as an active attacking piece, but merely to make way for the rook. Rook a e1. Rook e8. c4. Knight f7. A very clever move, tending to prevent c4, c5, and tempting white to play knight takes d7. d5. But it always happens in such cases that, if one line of attack is anticipated, there is another, and this is no exception to the rule, as will be seen. Knight takes d7, queen takes d7 followed by bishop takes f5 would be bad, as the following variation shows: knight g5, queen g4, rook takes f5, h4, h5, queen takes f5, e takes f5, rook takes e8, check, king h7, h takes g5, queen takes d4. Knight takes e5. Apparently the best way to meet the manifold threats of white. C takes d5 would make matters worse, as the white bishop would finally bear on the weak e-pawn via c4. Rook takes e5. g6. Queen h4. King g7. Queen d4. c5. Forced, as white threatened d takes e6 and also queen takes a7. Queen c3. b6. Queen d6 was better. But black wants to tempt white to play d takes e6, thinking that he will soon after regain his pawn with a safe position. Such, however, is not the case, as white quickly demonstrates. I must add that in any case black's position is, in my opinion, untenable, since all his pieces are tied up for the defense of a pawn, while white's pieces are free to act. D takes e6. Bishop c8. Bishop e2. The deciding and timely maneuver. All the black pieces are useless after this bishop reaches d5. Bishop takes e6. Bishop f3. King f7. Bishop d5. Queen d6. Now it is evident that all the black pieces are tied up, and it only remains for white to find the quickest way to force the issue. White will now try to place his queen at h6, and then advance the h-pawn to h5 in order to break up the black pawns defending the king. Queen e3. Rook e7. If f4, queen h3, h5, queen h4, rook e7, queen g5, king g7, h4, queen d7, g3, f takes g3, f4 and black will soon be helpless, as he has to mark time with his pieces while white prepares to advance a2, a4, a5, and finally at the proper time to play rook takes e6. Queen h6. King g8. h4. a6. h5. f4. h takes g6. h takes g6. Rook takes e6. Black resigns. Commenting on this game, Lasker said at the time that if white's play were properly analyzed it might be found that there was no way to improve it upon it. These apparently simple games are often of the most difficult nature. Perfection in such cases is much more difficult to obtain than in those positions calling for brilliant direct attack against the king, involving sacrifices of pieces.